Hitting the buttons. You're
Just tell
on.
me when. Welcome to Nerdarchy for nerds by nerds. I am Nerder Doug, and tonight I am evolving into a chat form with this nerd.
Darkest Day. What's up, my man?
Not much. That was a on the fly intro. Oh, is that me?
Is what
Yep.
you?
The sound.
Oh, you're hearing yourself. I hate that.
Mhm.
I hate it so much. Where's the sound coming from? What's
Yeah.
that noise?
So, as I hinted at in the intro, we're talking tonight, and the title of the video, we're talking about the 2024 evolution of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons tonight. Which,
Yeah.
oh, good.
I guess we can kind of kick it off with some of the stuff we kind of already know. Like,
Well, that's kind of funny bullet point, but go for it. I was gonna say not much other than that they're doing it and it's compatible. That's the only like
yeah.
official word that has been said.
Well, when I say what we know, I kind of mean from the standpoint of like, what has Wizard of the Coast been doing in their most recent products?
Okay.
And yeah, in the
Yeah.
Art of Arcana and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff, right? So there's a couple areas. One, obviously big change races, right? Like they're moving away from things that would be which they consider cultural to a race as being
Mhm.
core components of a race. So
Right.
like that's not going to be a thing. So I think they're going to revamp that, when they evolve in the evolved version.
Oh yeah, like the Tasha's way will be like kind of the standard, or
Yeah.
different. Yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
So
I welcome that change.
I just wonder like I kind of wonder for like what are they going to do with the half elf and the mountain dwarf, right? Like just mechanically for abilities they were just superior.
Mhm.
They just had more bonuses.
Does the half elf? I
Yeah,
know
they
the
get a
dwarf
plus two
does.
and two plus ones.
Oh, they get a plus and two plus ones. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that.
I mean, technically I guess also like the just yield generic human, right, has the most pluses.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, well, that'll be curious to see
I feel like
for
nobody
sure.
uses that.
I do, I mean, I don't know if it's just like subconsciously kind of like, to the, it's like usually when I play a human character, I'll just play the normal one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, you play with me. I don't give a shit about like, I don't want to say like min max, but like optimizing. It's like, it's just all like how I feel about the character. It's like, sure, if there was something where it's like, oh yeah, I would like to have this feed or whatever, then I probably would, but I wouldn't do it just because I get a feed. It just doesn't. I don't care about that.
Well, it's not even like for
Uh,
me. It's not even that. It's a less exciting choice, right? There's just like with the variant being able to start with a feat, like in 5e feats are significant. Like they change it not just mechanically, but they just change an aspect of your character, possibly giving it things that they couldn't even do before.
right. Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. Like, if that was something I wanted, like if I was playing a character and that
Yeah,
was part of what I'm imagining, then yeah. But if it wasn't, I wouldn't care that much.
the old plain
I
human.
actually don't play humans that much, to be honest with you. So I don't really have a lot of skin in the game. It's like I'm one of those people. It's like, hey, I am a human. I'd
Yeah.
rather explore what it's like to be something else.
So that's one of the areas. Like I think they're going to kind of like coalesce that. Now the other places, like they keep dabbling and poking around the edges of alternate types,
Mm-hmm.
right? They started it. I feel like they started it with Theros, right? With giving us a satyr being Fey.
Yeah, yeah, yep. That's
And
cool.
then like with the gothic lineages they started poking and prodding and even pulled back some, right? Like the reborn was going to be a construct, but now I think it's not. um
Right.
or maybe it was the Dampier was going to be undead, but now it's not, or whatever.
I think both those things were the case in the UA.
Yeah, in the UA, but I think one of them might have changed back and one of them maybe didn't. So like they seem to be wanting to really explore that and be like trying to figure out that part, right? So I think one of the key changes that'll happen is to make it so those are valid changes in the game that don't break other things in the game. Like so technically you can't charm person on something that has the the construct type, because
Mhm.
it's a construct. It's not a humanoid, right? So like I think maybe they're going to yeah. So like the Dampier is not undead anymore,
Right.
right? It's just humanoid. So I feel like we might see some tinkering with maybe I don't know if they'll do it in the race or if they'll do it in the spells
I think they would do it
themselves.
in the spells themselves, because my feeling is like, well, it it's going to be an entry point for a lot of people, right? So
Yeah.
like if they had like clunky traits, like oh, this thing, like when in regards to spells that mention humanoids, like your character is also part of the
Yeah.
it would just make it too
In
complicated.
the
So
UA
I
they tried exploring it a little bit by going, you're both. So if it affects one or the other, it affects you, right?
right.
So like that was their workaround, and I bet what they found out in the playtest was there was a lot of detriments to that
Yes.
that were unforeseen, right? So that's why I feel like they kind of keep playing with it and then pulling back.
Hmm. And the interesting thing, I mean, like this is still 3 years away, and
Yeah.
literally like the only word has been like it'll be compatible, and it's not a new edition, and things like that. So it's like everything other than what Ray said at D&D
Yeah.
Live is speculation. So just like when there's new books, I mean, a large part of me, I like to talk about it, but it's like I hope it's something that nobody speculates and it's cool and
Oh
different.
yeah, I would definitely like to see
Yeah.
that too. The other thing is they keep decoupling the number of times you can do something from stat modifiers
Hmm.
for classes. And also like they started kind of introducing with races, like you can do it X amount of times equal to your proficiency bonus, which I like it for the races. I don't really like it for the classes for the simple fact that like if you go into a class for a level and then you leave that class, you will still get more uses of that ability based on your proficiency
Yeah.
bonus. At
Well,
least if it was your modifier, it might change, but I don't think it's going to change a lot.
well, I agree with you, but I suspect the cases, at least partly due, or maybe wholly due to like it's just an easy game. When it comes out there, and it's just like it's anything that like sort of stands in the way of like living out your fantasy
Yeah.
is not part of their design goal. So I could see them going more towards things like that because and upsetting like hardcore gamers like, oh, that just is the easy button. It's like, well, yeah. But that's by design, I think. I mean,
Yeah, I think they're going to go in that direction as well. Um, just because it started popping up and they seem to be
yeah.
using it a lot.
And
Then
I mean, it is a significant difference that like when it first started being showing up in like UAs and stuff, it's like, oh, that's neat. And I didn't really think about like that, those sort of like implications.
yeah,
Like, wait, that means if just multi-class and you're still going to get your thing, but that could be part of the design too. It's like, well, that sort of when you do multi-class, that sort of prevents things from just being like dead abilities, where it's just like, oh, that thing sucks. Once you get in the higher levels, because it stopped getting cool. 15 levels ago when I was a
I don't
wizard or
think that
whatever.
usually happens. I think usually it's more because that's just it. Like generally it doesn't get better. You just keep getting more uses. So it would still
Hmm.
be like a minor in comparison to probably what level you are if you
I
just get a
guess.
low level.
Well, I guess I have my two minds there. What part of me thinks like, well, the way people play, at least publicly, because that's all I can see. I don't know how people play at their home games, which I suspect.
You're not lurking at people's windows, peeking in.
Well, I was gonna say I'm pretty sure it is vastly different than the sort of
Yeah,
like performance play that we even do ourselves.
weirdest
Um,
peeping tom ever.
so like for people like us, it's like I don't even barely ever even come close to depleting all the resources I have. So having be able to do something more
Yeah,
doesn't really seem all that. It's like I don't care.
yeah, that's
But
true. In a lot of our
in
games, it
a
won't matter.
yeah, but like in a more, I guess, traditional, or what I guess is standard play for most people, it's like they probably do have a lot more encounters a day. and where
What do you
they're
think,
using that
chat? Hey,
resource.
people in the chat, how many encounters do you have per session?
Not combat encounters, just something where you can interact and do stuff.
Yeah, well, I would say that needs to be something that would like deplete resources.
Yeah, but I mean, if you have an encounter, like a social encounter, it's like people probably cast like, will
Oh,
use
true.
like disguise spells and buffs to talk better, and all that kind of stuff.
All possible. So the other place where I'm kind of curious about is stats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we keep seeing with certain subclasses, they kind of use the subclasses to nullify the other, 5 stats. So that
Oh, you mean where it's like how Artificer's just like your
like
intelligence is for everything.
yeah, the Battlesmith and the Hexblade and like it really irks me because there's just some classes that are very dependent on their stats, and I think so I really feel like it really like screws them. Like if you want to play a ranger, like you need or monks are the worst. Like you need con, you need dex, and you need wisdom, right? To kind of like be viable. Well, not
Again, it just always comes down to place. I mean, you don't need con.
sure.
It's
Do
I
you need it?
mean more
No.
than anybody else does.
But
It's
compared
like,
to the character that only needs his intelligence to do everything,
but
like
yeah, but I mean by that you could say that character also needs con because they're not getting like a hit point bonus from their
well, true, but then it's only 2 stats, right? Where like 2 stats isn't bad, right? And the game is kind of designed around that. But when
Yeah.
you get to the classes that like kind of need 3, it's brutal. And it's usually like it's worse for the ranger and the monk. The monk
Mm-hmm.
suffers the worst because the monk is designed to be a melee combatant, which means you are in the thick of it. So like, and you also don't have a super high armor class,
Right.
or you need that high dex and that high wisdom in order to do it. But it's never quite high enough to compensate for a low con.
Well, see, again, it's like I really these kind of like things are difficult for me to think about because it's like I know that like just so much like everything's subjective, right? Like
Yeah,
if you are building a spreadsheet to see how you can squeeze out like 1 more point of damage per round on average and stuff, then yeah, sure, those things matter. But at the same time, it's like we also have like bounded accuracy, and I've just played a lot of D&D, and it's like I don't think I have ever myself or heard anybody really ever gripe or feel ineffective because like one of their ability scores wasn't super high. Like, have you? I mean, it has an effect, but not like a like impactful one where like people are like having a hard time playing monks and stuff like that because it's like, well, I just I don't have
yeah.
enough points in my whatever.
Well, anyway, I
Whereas
think
in
they're
the
going to
other
go
side
more
of the
towards
coin,
the direction of making more stats irrelevant.
now I don't even think irrelevant. I think maybe giving people like opening a window to like, hey, maybe your stats aren't like the end all be all every guy, right? Like if you're use your artificer example, maybe you just think you're a really smart guy and you can get by with that, and like you won't feel so bad because like maybe you roll your stats and like you get a strength of 6 and your lower things, and it's like, no, I don't care because what I'm good at,
Yeah.
like the things I do, I only need this one. So like those can be, you're not as dependent on those. It's kind of similar. I mean, a lot of like what do you call it? Like MMOs, the Final Fantasy one in particular. I'll make an analogy to that. Like the races have different starting stats, right? But it's like in that game, they're pretty much irrelevant. I mean, it has an effect on what you can do, but it's not like, oh man, if you play, like an elven whatever, like that sucks compared to the Lalafell of that same class. It's like, not really. I mean, look at bounded accuracy and all that too. So like a legend, like the best thing you can get is a +3 item, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like you could start with a stat and +3, and most people like, oh, your main stat's only +3, that sucks. It's like, does it? Like the most legendary thing you could get would equal what most people would think is like a crappy starting stat or main stat.
So Chris wants to know, which class do you most hope gets reworked in the next evolution?
I don't care about that stuff because I don't think anything's like, oh, they're weaker than this, and I don't care. I like all the classes now, and I'm
I
curious to
would
see
like to
what they'll
see
do
the
next.
monk get a little help with those key points.
Sure,
Like all their abilities are dependent on it, so
yeah,
like it's like, you go through one combat and you're done. Now, if you're in our games, it doesn't matter nearly as much, right?
right.
But in if you're playing in one of these games where you're playing multiple encounters, they're gonna go really fast.
Well, that kind of stuff, I would say that is why it is. I strongly advocate people to fill out those surveys, right? Because, like, let's say they didn't do any surveys. The only evidence of play they would have is like stream games, right?
Yeah,
Of which largely that stuff doesn't matter because they're not just dungeon crawling through like room after room and depleting their resources. So yeah, I mean, whatever changes you'd like to see, I would strongly suggest they play it. And I mean, when they were doing D&D next, they had like what, like 200,000 like pieces of feedback almost, and that was like way before D&D was anything close to as culturally penetrating as it is now. I'd suspect now if they did that survey for that, they'll
yeah,
probably get millions of
yeah. I
surveys.
wonder what they get on average for their unearthed arcanas.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Um,
they seem to take the feedback and data they get from them to heart. So
mhm. Yeah, I mean, and like when new things come out, this is no different. This evolution thing, and you might see dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people hating it. It's like, or why did they do this? It's like, well, you got to remember, they're to that point, they're getting humongous amounts of feedback, and it's like
yeah,
not everybody's gonna love it. And if you're one of those people, it's like you're not the majority. I mean, I could tell, I'm not like trying to be a shill, but it's just like whatever they put out based on their survey and what they want to do, that's what most people want. And if you don't want it, then don't play like that. I mean, been doing that since first D.
so one of the things we do know, like one of the few things they did actually say, is they're revamping monster stats, which
Thank
I
God.
totally agree with that. Like we were on the live chat today. We had Sly Flourish on, and we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about that. And he was talking about breaking Chris Perkins's balls because what Azarek in the Tomb of
Yeah,
Annihilation,
yeah,
one of his lair actions is cast a third level spell or lower, and like his third level spells were like knock and arcane lock, right? So
yeah. Right.
so like utility spells on a monster stat block really are just clutter. Like if you feel like you need to do something like that as the DM,
Oh, yeah.
just
Right.
do it,
Right.
right? Like just be like,
Yes.
okay, he can do the, because it probably doesn't directly affect a combat per se and affect your players.
Well, in that regard, that kind of one of my bullet points. I think the biggest different thing is going to be the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Yeah,
To that point, it would probably just have tips like that, like practical use tips. And it's like, and I imagine like stat blocks might still have things like that, to which there might be guidance of like, hey, like maybe your games aren't just mostly about combat, and that would be something that would be relevant. But yeah, just like making that even more explicit than it is now, and hopefully rewording it a little bit, because it's like, as much as I appreciate that, like the GM's the arbiter of the rules and all that, it's like I mean, I'm a little tired of seeing, it's just like, hey, it says I can just, we can just do whatever we want. It's like, yeah, but I mean, not just like on a whim, willy nilly constantly. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm just meandering there, but like making it, more clear of like doing things like that, where like you don't have to like check off a spell slot if you want them to like lock a door behind them, right? But maybe
yeah.
you're the kind of group that does like, I want everything accounted. Like maybe you're chasing a Cyrac, through his lair or whatever, and he's like locking doors behind him or something. I don't know. I mean, there's probably people for whom like getting down to the minutia like that is the
That's
juice,
their
right?
fun.
Yeah. Like, oh man, we're gonna just chase them and run them dry and run them out of spell slots, and
He's
I
gonna
don't
run
know.
out of doors to lock.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I
Let's
guess.
see what else is going on in the
But
chat. I don't think it should be mentioned that compatibility might change because I have no reason to think that it will. They didn't say anything or show anything yet.
yeah,
So
they said that
maybe.
it's going to be compatible.
Yeah.
You know,
I actually
streamlining.
have a strange theory about all that, which I'll get into in a bit.
Yeah, so
Let's see.
streamlining will be nice. You know, they'll probably give a lot more, like you said, advice in the DM's guide as far as like including things like session 0 and maybe social contracts and
And
maybe
also, I
safety
mean,
tools.
honestly, yeah, I don't really care about any of that stuff. But I mean, that's what the cottage industry we're in's for, man. So I hope they don't do that.
Yeah.
But I would like to see, for instance, like one of the more popular posts on our website, at least that I push all the time, is about like social interaction, right? With people like, oh, like the eloquence bar, just, blah, 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 or like you can nat 20, you can persuade the king to give you his thing. It's like there is stuff in there that is very useful for that, except nobody uses it. So maybe expanding on that a little bit and like
expand on it so no one uses the expanded stuff either.
no, I just mean like expand in the sense of like, I actually, this will kind of tie into my point. And actually, one of the first posts on our website that you wrote is super relevant to this. So I'll kind of encapsulate all these things. So, back when D&D Next was a thing, one of the big marketing pushes was like, oh, it's modular, right? Like they're just all these little modules of content that you can, pick and put. They didn't, when the rubber hits the road, it's like, it didn't really,
They
like
never
feats
did
are like a module of content, but it's like, are they? I mean, it's not really like structured that way, right? And then you see,
I will say they did do it a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
They did it with supernatural gifts in Theros, and they did it in Dark Powers and Ravenloft, right?
Yeah.
But
and that's exactly what. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
But that's it. Like that's the only time they've done it, and it took years for them to even like dip their pinky toe in the water.
And that's what your post was about, which was very prescient because you wrote it. It really sticks out to me because you wrote it before the player's handbook and all that came out, when it was literally just that playtext test bundle, right?
No, it wasn't playtest. It was the basic rules were out, at least.
Well, the D&D Next.
No, we weren't. We didn't even know. We didn't know about D&D Next.
I don't know. It was from. I mean, I can go look it up, but it was
pretty. It was
old.
after
But
the basic rules came out, because I know for sure, because like we didn't know about D&D Next because we had just moved on. We
right.
We really didn't hang out online at that time, and it was like it wasn't until we were doing Nerdarchy and like halfway through the first year they dropped. It was 4th of July weekend. I'll remember it because it was a long weekend, and I stumbled across the basic rules that you could download for free. I was like, hey guys, did you know they're doing another D&D? Like, at this time 4th edition was still out, and we had been playing other games, surprisingly, and so we're like, do you want to talk about this? That's why I know for sure it wasn't D&D Next.
Sure. Well, regardless, but what you mentioned in it is was that like, this is an exciting way to sort of like curate your campaign, right?
Yeah.
And like, if you think about it, like little modules, literally, it's like, okay, I want to put like this in there. I want to put these races in there. You kind of got into that in your post. And you see things like that in Theros. It's like, here's the races that live in Theros. Here's the, whatever. But nobody does that. It was just like when the rubber hits the road, they just don't do it. And all the books are the same way. Like people will say, oh, there isn't enough like exploration in the game. It's like, well, that was, I mean, I guess it's kind of like bad on Wizards because it's like they, that was the message when it was new. Yeah. But it's like, well, new players coming in now don't know that, like, that was the point. It's like, well, if you want to expand on exploration, then you get Tomb of Annihilation, because in addition to this campaign, it also has all this stuff about hex crawling, right? Or if you want more about like vehicle travel, it's like, that's what it goes to Salt Marshes for, or, like exploring the underground. That's what Out of the Abyss is for. Right. They just also happen to have, they're like nestled within this larger campaign, which not all people are going to get or play.
Well, so
I thought
thought of it as like more along Theros and Ravenloft, where it's like, here's another set of rules you can just add to the game or take away from the game. Really easy. Like, for
But
instance,
you also did mention specifically like races and things.
yeah, well, like, say they introduce Dark Sun, right? They finally decide Dark Sun, everything's psionic. You know, so, you know, maybe there's just a block, a new stat mechanic block of rules that you just insert into your character that has some kind of psionics in, or whatever those rules are.
So to that point, it's like I could see if there was a 5e Dark Sun, it would probably be like, well, this is the psionic stuff. It's also comes packaged with thing. Because at the same time, you also don't want to like just get into printing splat books where like all that's in it is a bunch of character options, right? So it's like, oh well, it's kind of a value add, you know, in the same way that like DM books usually sell less than player facing stuff, right? It's like,
well, that's why they started like mixing them a lot, right? You notice they don't just do one or the other for the most part, unless it's an adventure.
Right. You know, Downtime's the same thing, which is, you know, one of my favorite things, and like one of my favorite books is Acquisitions Inc., which basically is just downtime. Like that's what
you want to play a campaign of Downtime? Here you go.
Right. And here's a bunch of other cool little modules to go along with that. So I could see like sort of taking those modules out of those books and putting them in the DMG. You know, somebody I read recently on Reddit, just like today or yesterday, brought up a interesting thing that I totally forgot about. Like in that original D&D Next packet, there was a bunch of stuff about exploration and like hex crawling, and they sort of like pared it down, and that's what's the like travel and weather part of the D&D.
They moved it to Tomb of Annihilation.
Yeah, but who knows? Again, maybe people were like, I don't care about this. I mean, it's just it's a different kind of. It's just, this hobby is just weird, man, and it's like there's always going to be people that are disappointed that it doesn't have something they like, or they don't like the way it is, and the bigger the player base grows, the more that's going to happen.
We got an old head in the chat. Nerdarchy from the table out in the backyard.
Oh yeah.
We got the barbecue going on. Cups. What about HP system for 5.5 thing?
See, that's going to stay the same.
Yeah, it's
like stuff like that. People thinking there's going to be like fundamental changes like that. I don't know, but I would greatly suspect you're going to be vastly disappointed.
I would just like to see them expand on the mechanics that already exist, right?
Yes.
Like we did a little bit with our hit dice to heroics, like we've seen them using
our best-selling book, by the way.
We see them using just like a tiny bit here and there. Now it's like, you know, I think was it the Astral Elf? One of them gets to use, you know, the hit dice or whatever. Or...
Yeah, it sounds familiar. The Autonome. I think it's like if somebody casts Mending on you, you can.
Oh yeah, they can spend a hit dice, and I think the other one, there's just like a couple places. One of the Dark Gifts lets you tap into it. But it's like, it seems like such an underutilized resource, and also inspiration, right? Let inspiration just power other things, and not just an advantage on a roll.
I mean, yeah, right. You know, many times again, I just sort of like, you know, I probably sound like a shill or whatever. It's like, I kind of give Wizards a pass for two reasons. One, streaming just took their game and made it super blow up all over the world.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess a dovetailing with that, it just changed the way people play. So like, you know, a lot of the things that we think are issues now, it's like they probably just would never have been an issue. Because, you know what I mean? Like, for instance, like the inspiration. It's clunky in there and stuff, you know, but basically it's like a role-playing tool, right? But, you know, like the way things have evolved, like the way we play, more like, you know, really like a lot heavy on the role playing. It's just like, well, I don't need encouragement to do that. We just do that. That's why it's like we just start with inspiration. You can stack it up, because it's like if I handed out inspiration every time a player like acted in character, I'd just have like I might as well just have like a limitless bag of it and like think. I mean, because that's all we do, you know. There's a lot of role playing.
Well, I guess the way it's intended, though, it's supposed to be specific to their traits, right? Like that's, which I don't even pick those anymore. Like,
but again, I mean, right? But there's like those are, you know, again, they're coming from a place where like a lot of people we're just like crunchy 3.5 players that for whom that wasn't a big part of gaming was the role playing stuff. So
Yeah.
like, calling out, I'm going to, play to my flaw and, try to, pickpocket that guy. It's like, it's an encouragement. So to your point, yes, I would like to see more about it because it's like, I just don't think, maybe people that just play like dungeon crawls in their basements or whatever, that is, maybe they use the inspiration all the time. I don't know.
Yeah.
For that
I
reason,
mean, generally in our games, it's just for really good dick jokes and whatnot,
Oh,
and
really?
making everybody laugh.
Yeah.
Somebody does something cool at the table. Um,
Right.
just like
Um,
random stuff.
yeah. So let's see. I saw a question there. Oh, it's from Chris Housenick. He says, what do you like about the DMG? What do you not like about the DMG? What do you use in the DMG? What do you not use in the DMG? That's one of my favorite books. I almost every time we have a topic or anything,
Yeah.
I always look in there, and I almost sometimes think like, is this some kind of magical book? Because I swear it's like, how is all this stuff in there? Like, it might not be extensive, but it's in there, and there's a lot of cool stuff, and I feel like it's so woefully underread that like it. I shake my head many times when I see people on social media like, I just thought of this awesome idea for my D&D game. It's like,
You're like
these
DMG
rules for
page
climbing on
72.
another creature or something, and you're so smart. Wow, that's cool. It's like, it's the DMG. Like, many things that people like come up with
Yeah.
are already there.
There's
So good on them. I mean, if they did come to that conclusion, that's awesome. But it's just strange to me.
nothing new under the sun. So they say we're going to get it in a new format that we've never seen D&D before.
Oh, really? I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, I have no idea what that means.
Probably layout, I'd imagine. I mean, or a new format,
Yeah,
digital. Like, I mean, it could be like more.
I mean,
digital.
we've seen digital before, though.
Well, I mean, we do marketing too. It's like you can kind of not twist words, but it's like,
Yeah.
never before seen. It's like, is it really?
I mean, I remember when I used to buy my 3.5 books. Like you could buy and download the PDF when you bought the book.
Really? I don't remember that. I don't think I really used the computer all that much back then.
Cause and I would do my prep from there or whatever, and like they would always get like an extra $5 out of me because I would order the book and then just buy the PDF as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there was that whole part of that one survey that like disappeared after a day had like suggested they were going to do some kind of virtual tabletop. It's also 3 years away. I mean, who knows? They could do AR or VR.
Yeah. I guess if they did VR, that would be something AR or VR would be something we have never seen before. I'm skeptical of Wizards' ability to pull it off, but we'll see.
I would imagine. I mean, look, they're much more successful brand is Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
Which just went digital. And granted that's a much different sort of game, but it's like, hey, like if people could just do everything on their phones and all that kind of, or their tablet, and and you could have like, really integrated stuff, I'd be for that. I mean, I would love it if it's like I didn't have to lug books around. I never even buy the books anyway. I'm not one of those people like, I like to have the hardcover. Like,
so you're speculating they're going to squeeze D&D Beyond out?
I mean, I think that'd be really foolish just because it's like, man, that's really big and stuff. Yeah. And, a lot of people use it. But who knows if they came along and were like, hey, and they did all those things that people, like if you buy our books, you can get it unlocked with the code for free and all that stuff.
Yeah, I feel like that would definitely earn a lot of animosity.
I mean, it would from Nerdarchy because that's like a big sponsor of ours.
It is a big sponsor of ours. Like they'd just be like, I mean, maybe if they bought D&D Beyond, like
I could see that.
That would make more sense.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe they would. I mean, to your end user, like these kind of things, like I don't care. Most people still think Wizards owns D&D Beyond, so
yeah.
If they really did, then
I think that was probably a huge miss when they let fandom scoop up D&D Beyond as opposed to, Wizards picking it up and just bringing it all in house.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I guess logistically, probably a big thing. You'd have to like hire all this, I don't know how any of that works.
You would just buy. You would just acquire the company. Well, I mean, you would basically do the same thing fandom. Hasbro can do it.
Yeah, that's true. Like, there was no bumps of
yeah,
like in service, yeah, that's a good point.
Like just like who signs your checks will change. That's all, right? If you work for that company,
right? So one sort of like out there theory or speculation I have, related to Magic the Gathering is like I think that it's possible maybe they would create something sort of like how Magic has blocks, right? Like there's the standard block and the historic block, and like standard in Magic is like the last 2 years of sets or whatever, right? So it's like maybe in order to be compatible, it's like, well, standard D&D is now like this set of books. So to that regard, it's like they would never have to make a new edition. They could just every few years be like, well, now D&D standard is this, but if you want to play historic D&D, then it's all these books too. I can see that. Even in the sense of like maybe they would change all the spells. Like Charm Person would just be like, now it says any creature or any player character or whatever, however they want to change it. So you're just playing with different versions of D&D.
I would say yes and no. If it ever gets acquired by another company, there will be a new edition.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like they always do that, right? No matter what. Like the herald of a new edition or the herald that the company's been bought is a new edition.
Oh yeah, it's like when you get a new manager at a job. It's like one of the first things they do is probably like fire some people and just change things because it's like you just got to show your authority.
Yeah, you got to show your dominance.
Yeah. One change we know is going back to the stat blocks that you mentioned earlier. That again, I think it's moot to even say it's causing division in the community because it's like anything does in this day and age. It's like some weird thing. Is the spell casting?
Yeah.
Which I'm 100% for, and it's like I think many DMs, or at least every DM I know, like who does any amount of like monster creation, eventually gets to that point anyway. You're like, this is just stupid. Like, trying to like, what level spellcaster would this guy be, and like how many slots do they have? It's like just give them cool abilities. When you're the DM, I don't want to do that when I'm the DM. Like, oh, which spell slot? Oh, I'll upcast this. Like, just give them, like creatures we make almost never have spells anymore.
Very, very rarely. Well, it's also boring, right? Like, I like, we like creating unique abilities that thematically fit whatever that creature is. And it's just far more interesting than they can cast Fireball or whatever.
Right.
Just feels, right, because it just feels lazy.
It's along the same lines of like DMs who build who just make player characters into monsters. It's like why? Like
have you watched
so many things you're never going to use. They're probably going to live for about 30 seconds once you roll initiative.
Have you watched any of Nerd Immersion's videos on what he thinks the next D&D is going to be? I'm gonna plead
the fifth.
I thought about it, but I just never got around to it. And
he did do. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just keep seeing him come up on my feed. I think he's must have put up like 4 or 5 already.
That's it. The one I thought was interesting though approach was I think he looked at the 3.0 player's handbook and the 3.5 player's handbook to see what the differences were, and like maybe something along those lines. I honestly don't even remember. And again, it's so weird being in this position where we're like always talking about this and it's our job and everything, because I just, as much as I love D&D, I've been playing it for like 30 years now and stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't care, but I just never cared about the crunch that much. Like when we're little kids, of course we didn't grasp all the things, but it's like I didn't think Thaco was clunky. because it was just what it was. Or like in 1E, it's like we never used the speed factor because it was like I don't even know what this is saying to me and stuff. So it's like to me, D&D has always just been what happens around the table, which again is just so subjective
Uh,
that it's like I don't really. I mean, I like when they to see new stuff because it's fun to look through it, but I just never really get upset because it's like I don't care, and if I don't like it, like Jeremy Crawford isn't going to show up to my house and be like, "No, you're doing it wrong" or whatever. It's like they don't care. They don't care either. Once you buy the book, Hasbro, I guarantee everybody out there that you don't give two shits what you do at your table.
in my mind, the mythical Jeremy Crawford bursts through your door, and he always rips.
I mean,
off
he
his
would be
shirt.
the first one to probably say that. It's like
He is.
whatever comes out is
Yeah.
what whoever owns D&D wanted it to be right now, officially, which is fine.
Chris wants to know, besides the Lich, which monster really needs a stat block revision to be easier to run at the table? Well, you know what it is? Like any monster that has just tons and tons of abilities
Yes.
that it can't do in the same round, like those are the ones that probably need to be rethought. Like it's
or
different
that
if they
you'll
have
just forget.
yeah, like if they have it's different if they have a bonus action, a reaction, maybe they have some layer actions or whatever, and that stuff's all different. That's fine. But like how many times, like you said, you just forget to do it, or your monster dies in the first round, so it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
Some of it just becomes like a lot to sort through, especially like if you're a newer GM.
I'm not sure how they would incorporate this, but like, I'll use the giant for an example because we were talking about it last week just on the phone, you and I, and in our newsletter, about the rock, right? And to a lesser extent, like that climbing onto a bigger creature, because it's like I have a pretty good memory. I have an exceptional memory, I would go so far as to say. And I've looked through the DMG a lot and everything, but I don't remember what the actual like mechanics of things are, right?
He does, folks.
So, like,
Doug is a straight up freak when it comes to his memory.
yeah, I might have to remind myself not everybody has good memory. But anyways, you know, depending on how big you think a rock that a giant throws is it 3 feet high when it hits the ground? I mean, that would create half cover or full cover, 3/4, somebody bent down, right? Or the climbing into a bigger creature and things. So like, I would like to see something, whether it's in the DMG or right in the monster things of like those sorts of things. Maybe they'll even reference that. Maybe that's what they mean by like a format you've never, seen before, where it's just like, it would just have that stuff like included where it might be relevant to make to make those things dynamic. So, if anybody's wondering what I'm talking about, in our newsletter, I don't remember which it was, I talked about like, well, giants, they throw racks, they land somewhere, right? Like, people think, oh, giants are boring. It's like, are they? I mean, that might create cover for their, medium-sized allies on the ground who then rush up and hide behind them, or for the players themselves, right? And then again, like climbing onto a creature, or you were just talking about with Mike Shea, like just more stuff that's not intuitive. Like, what if a giant just chucks you, and it's like, well, that's going to take you about a minute to run back there at your speed, so you're probably never going to see anything else in that battle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're just out of it. Yeah, I'm trying to skim through and see if like they say how big the boulders are, right? Because
I mean, you think a giant's 15 feet high could probably like palm. I mean, they're probably like they're palming it, right?
yeah, it's like a basketball to them.
Right, so it's probably at least 2 feet in diameter. Right? So it's like, yeah, you could duck down and get half cover, I think.
But stone is also very heavy too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, it doesn't take a lot of stone to add a lot of weight,
right?
So I don't know.
I mean,
and also in previous editions, giants were just much bigger, so you could definitely picture them throwing much bigger rocks.
Yeah, maybe that's it with me too, because to me, giants are they're pretty big. Although I will say, my girlfriend's neighbor has one of those giant skeletons in the yard, and I think it's like
Uh,
15 feet high. It's like, that's pretty damn scary if that was like a fire giant with like a sword that was bigger than your body and stuff. It's like they're pretty damn big. Or even Game of Thrones. It's like they're about like D&D giant size, and it's like,
yeah.
yeah, when you're looking at the stat block and just looking at their hit points and AC, it's like, oh, that's nothing. But I'm all about selling the sizzle and the DM, and that's part of your job too. Is just like invoke the fear in the players. Like, it's just today I was reading an article, not to get stuck on giants too much, but somebody was, I don't remember, it was like Geek Native or something. But they were talking about like, giants are pretty underwhelming, right? And they're like, oh, they're siege monster thing, for instance. Like, how's that going to, it doesn't even have anything to do with player characters. Like, does it? Are you standing on a staircase? Bye. It's like it could just like smash things apart. I mean, so I guess go back to what I'd like to see in the DMG is just more stuff like that, where like that's how you use those things. Like it's not immediately obvious that like even an Earth Elemental has siege monster. It's like, okay, it's like, well, that should tell you like break up the environment with them around the players. And it's like, sure, if you want to get super crunchy, it's like you can figure out how many hit points the staircase has, but if I was a DM, I'd just say it smashes it, and they might roll or do some damage or whatever.
Does the DMG have like does it have like splash damage or splash
Probably.
effects? I know like third edition did. So like not only like did you have to deal with the boulder, like technically there were rules for like where did the boulder go after it hit whatever it was thrown at, right?
Yeah.
And then you had to like worry about that.
I guess those are the parts of D&D to me that's like they're never the closest they came to encompassing it is 3.5, where it's like there's a rule for everything.
Yeah.
And so like finding that middle ground again, and it's just like the more people play, the harder it is to find that ground where it's just like for some people they just have got to know every number, and the players too, right? Whereas like playing with you guys on our Tuesday night games, if we were playing D&D and I said, yeah, the giant just smashes the staircase you're standing on, and I need you to make a dexterity save, you guys wouldn't be like, how many hit points did the staircase have? Like, did you figure that out? Because it's like, it's just fun, okay? Like, I'm not trying to kill you. It's just exciting. Just, go with it, right?
Just go with it. Stop being a jerk.
Yeah. So it's just subjective. I mean, like balance and all that stuff, it's just 100% subjective. Everybody's table's different.
And you're right. Like me and Ted like to get fiddly about the rules and talk about optimization and compare things. But at the end of the day, like I don't really play that way. I don't really worry about it at the table. And like, like we just played a Halloween one shot this Saturday. And like instead of like having optimal stats, I was like, well, how many like positive stats can I have instead of having like the best stat, right?
Yeah.
So like I ended up with like a couple 14s, a 16, and the rest were all 12s. Even after like the fourth level stat adjustment or whatever. Just because sometimes I think like the dump stat, the idea is kind of cool because it inherently creates a flaw in your character, a descriptor. But like when every single character has that, it's not unique anymore, right? It's not interesting as if everyone has the same thing going on. So like sometimes I'll just use point buy to just make a more even keel character that like isn't awesome at anything, but is okay at a bunch of things.
It's probably at least partly a function of because this like is our job, and we just like have turned those kind of discussions into like that's all I think about all day, right? Where it's just like you start to realize like things like that where like or like our strength video where it's like people in this world are much stronger than on Earth, right? So it's like and in a white room on paper, like, oh man, like you're 14 strength, like you're a fighter, that sucks. It's like, dude, you can like you could carry like a 500-pound pack on your back for like 8 hours of walking.
Yeah, what
that's
is it,
insane.
Like 15 times your stat.
Yeah, or whatever, where it was like even 300 pounds. It's like I hiked through Germany with a 40-pound pack, and we were dying. Now I'm not like a fighter.
It's too heavy. It's supposed to be like. I mean, Ted could tell you, but your pack is supposed to be like less than 30% of your body weight. I
Right.
think.
Right. So to me, like having those high, I don't think like if I was playing a fighter and I only had like a 14th strength, I wouldn't feel like, oh, there's just a weakling. It's like, no, he's not an,
Like,
Hercules.
so I got a friend, right? And he decided like he was going to do this. He was going to go on this hike and this camp and do camping through the Appalachian. So he bought all the stuff. He was ready to go. I think he lasted like a day and a half. And like one of the problems is like he just had too much stuff. Like like he ran into another hiker and the other hiker looked at him and saw like his gallon jugs of water or whatever. It's like that's an interesting choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like not knowing like that's like way too much weight.
Mm-hmm. Uh,
So
yeah.
like what we do in D&D is not really even close.
Right, but at the same time, it's like when I'm a player, I like that kind of stuff. Not the
Yeah.
specific numbers of like, oh, I can carry this much and all that. But it's like I've done hiking, and I like to put myself in character shoes and role
Yeah.
play. Oddly
There's a
enough, so it's
reason
like,
why you travel with a horse. It's not because you move faster. It's
yeah,
because it carries more stuff than you can
yeah.
carry.
So like to me, it's fun to like feel immersed in like there's tiny times whether there's like a combat situation when I as a player might know like, yeah, this is no big deal. But it's like I'm still gonna try to play it like
Yeah.
with Giants. Again, it's like, yeah, I know they're probably gonna go down. They're not too tough, but I still would play as if it is scary because that's the
Yeah.
point. And I did just think of one or a couple of things though specific that I would like to see in a revised in this evolution is what do you call it, base or like a sorcerer spells for the core uh classes. You know how they get the
Yeah,
bonus spells.
yeah. I
I'd like to
think
see that.
I think a lot of the core stuff's going to get updated because
Yeah,
to bring it up to par with with the classes and
power creep
subclasses that came out later.
because there was power creep. Let's face it,
Yeah,
it's power creep.
there always is.
But interestingly enough, like the sorcerer, I never really played one before. And again, we don't really do like 6 encounters a day, but it's like, man, I don't know why people are complaining. I feel like I have a ton of spells that I can cast a lot, very often in
Yeah.
our Tuesday night game. It's like, I don't feel like they're that week. Again, it's just place I've never played it. I guess I've never really, I haven't played a 5th edition character. I was like, man, this guy stinks compared to the rest of the party or whatever. Although, I will say you make characters that are exceptionally good at combat. So I usually feel like that in our group, like everybody else kind of sucks compared to your characters in that regard.
I do
I
like
don't mean
bringing.
that as like a complaint or anything. I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
saying.
Well, they're usually like one trick ponies or whatever, right? They just have a
But that's
gimmick and
kind
they
of
like to do
tough
that.
in our games because it's like if we only have one fight that day and you go first, it's like, well, he's just going to kill it. Because it's like you don't have any fear of like, yeah, I'm gonna use my action surge and
Yeah,
everything I
yeah.
got.
It was more like in the last game where Ted run the dungeons and delving, and
Yeah,
like that character was designed to just get a lot of attacks and get a lot
sure,
of bonuses to damage and
but that can be fun too. I mean, even
yeah,
in that kind of game, it's like I started playing like, okay, well, I'm just gonna start, taking like weird spells and stuff, because when we're not in a fight, then I'll have a bunch of unusual stuff to do or whatever.
it would be interesting to play in a campaign where there is a lot more encounters per day that drain resources. Right? They don't have to be combat encounters, but
Yeah.
you can definitely drain resources with exploration and social
Mm-hmm.
encounters as well. But our group doesn't have a lot of experience with that. Generally, like our social encounters don't really drain that many resources the way
Yeah.
we play them.
Well, again, we just don't. Yeah, you don't rest, or you're not like stuck somewhere where you can't rest.
Yeah,
Like, and you're gonna have to do a bunch of stuff that day. But yeah, again, that's how everybody plays different. I mean, I still like talking about all this stuff. It is fun. I love doing our CBGs and like trying to, or just looking at new, when stuff comes out and thinking like, oh, that'd be cool to play a character like this
yeah,
or whatever.
yeah. So I'm just most curious about what this other format's going to be.
Yeah, that is different. That is interesting. Formats like I don't. I mean, definitely, I've seen a lot of complaints about just like the layout of it, not like the visual, but
Yeah.
just like it's just not intuitive. Like somebody mentioned in the chat, like you open up the DMG and the first thing's like, "Here's how to build a universe." Like, well, what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Can we start with maybe a tavern?
Yeah. Do what all of us say. Start small. Like, here's how to build
Yeah.
like an NPC. They get into like some pretty heady stuff right off the bat. But again, I gotta say, I mean, for most of the hobby's history, it's been a even more niche now, and it's like, people that like they were not that they whoever owns D&D isn't always trying to attract new customers, but it's like there's some inherent like people that are buying the DMG and stuff probably already played D&D, right, to some
Yeah.
extent, you know.
Yeah, and I feel like those are the people that often are like, this isn't there, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
definitely
Yeah,
guilty of it. Like, what do I need to read the DMG for? I've already read 4 of them, right?
yeah.
Like, what is that going to tell me? But I mean, with that being said, because we kind of went through it and broke it down
Mm-hmm.
into very small chunks, we did actually read this DMG. But
Yeah.
like that was 8 years ago.
But the interesting thing, well, it's not like I'm a rules stickler and I don't like to read, look in the DMG because it's like, oh, that's how you do the climbing onto another feature. I just think it's neat that it's in there,
Yeah.
and more so from a point of like, it just inspires you as a DM, right? Like, even if you opened it up and you didn't know anything, you start reading about like different like multiverses and all these like weird planes of existence. It's like, maybe that gives you a bunch of cool ideas. I
Oh
mean, I've
yeah, like
certainly
climbing on
got,
monsters. What
yeah.
what it like it instantly like just makes me think of like what if the bad guys, the villains, are basically riding this gargantuan creature like bigger than any of the sizes actually exist,
Yeah.
right? Like this thing will wipe out cities just by walking through it. And the objective is to get on it and actually fight your way to the person that's controlling it so you can stop it or turn it
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, right? And in that sense, like it's a creature and a monster, but at the same time, it's more of a like almost like a force of nature
Yeah.
or something to overcome than to fight.
Yeah. Like that Shadow Classes game, except you do fight them. What was I gonna say? One thing from the beginning of the chat, we were talking about like the ability scores and stuff, and I understand like to some extent, it's like, well, they are different like species, so it's like an orc just is stronger than a human, right? But
Yeah.
I've kind of like turned a corner in that, and actually, Stephen, it was like the final little puzzle piece for me in this game last week. Is it's like, well, maybe by divorcing those sorts of things, you're really it's like a DM aid because you're not giving a DM, you're not putting any notions in the DM's head. Like maybe the halflings in your world are small, furry, snarf-like looking creatures, and they're not just like big-footed things. So like maybe they're really good at, maybe they're really high, con and charisma or whatever. So it's like I get the extent of like there's just sort of like making it into more a generic storytelling game
Yeah.
than a crunch. It's just changing. Like maybe that's what they mean by evolving. It's like, yeah, for a long time it was about Dungeons and Dragons, and they call it dungeon. I mean, even the word dungeon masters, because like from back in the day, it's like you had your dungeon, and you were the master of it that you made, and people would come around and like go through your dungeon, right? Like that's why you're a dungeon master. It's like I don't think they'll get rid of that name, but it's like that's
Nah.
just not what people do anymore, right?
Do you
To a
think?
large extent.
Do you think in D&D Evolve they'll finally get rid of alignment and kill that
No,
cow?
no, I don't have it. I've never had a problem with alignment. I have a problem with most people like seeing it through some weird lens of theirs. But I wish they would just double down on what it originally was. It's not like this postmodern, like, well, there's shades of gray. Like, what if that guy was abused? He's chaotic evil. But, it's like, it's a cosmic force of evil.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I mean, I grew up reading like Elric and those sorts of books where it's like, that was the struggle, law versus chaos. Like, chaos was like everything out there where all the monsters live. and evil gods are
They're not
trying
going to
to
double down on it. I can tell you that much.
Well, I just meant like not double down in the sense of like bring that more to the forefront. I'm sure they
Yeah.
won't because they're just a kind of a postmodern thinking thing.
Yeah.
But I think just adding that one little simple word in the stat blocks that did it for me. It's like typically whatever. It's like okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Sure, it's just like the orcs that you meet in the dungeon are typically chaotic evil. Doesn't mean they all are. It just means the ones that are trying to kill you because you want their gold are probably evil.
That doesn't even sound like they have to be evil.
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like you're the mugger, right?
Well, I mean, how often is that sort of the theme of stories where it's like, wait, are we the bad guys?
Are we the bad guys? We were the bad
I mean,
guys all
many
along.
adventures are just your mercenaries who are just doing somebody's bidding for money.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know. So like my thing with alignment is like once it stopped mattering to the mechanics, I'm like, we don't really need it anymore.
Okay, yeah, I guess maybe they'll just shift it over to monsters as just like a way to sort of shorthand keyword how they might act. I could see that. Yeah, just totally like it's not even in the player's handbook because it's like it's just irrelevant.
Yeah. Right?
Right?
It just seems like it takes up space for no reason.
Yeah, because I could see maybe they'll just shift that over to like the monster manual. Where it's just like that's who it is.
There's like 3 magic items or something, right, where it makes a difference. Or like there's really oddly specific places. Like if you die and you're killed by a shadow and you're not evil, you become a shadow, right? Like, but like you could like compile all of that stuff and it wouldn't even be a full sheet of paper.
Yeah, like back in the day, in older editions, it was even like that was where you went when you died, and there was a language for it. I mean, it was like a thing, But yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, when
classes, like it all like tied into it, but it's like, all right, I'm just kind of the opinion like either it means something or it doesn't. Pick one.
Yeah, it has no mechanical meaning, but. Yeah, I could just see it being used more as like a guide tool. But yeah, for players, it's like it's just
like as the DM,
it has no mechanical benefit. It's totally pointless for players.
As a DM, when your players are doing stuff in the game, you're gonna know what they are, right? By what they do. It doesn't matter what's on their sheet. Like it could say chaotic good, but if they rob every house they go into, I think we could probably scratch the good part, right?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like when people, I was just reading something on Reddit the other day about, somebody was playing with a new group and they wanted to play an Oathbreaker, and the DM, was like, they want evil characters in their game, or even if it wasn't an Oathbreaker, it's like, hey man, most of the stories I hear sounds like people are pretty evil, no matter what it says on their sheet.
Yeah.
So it's like they're gonna do what they're gonna do. I mean, like. A lawful good paladin who cuts somebody's tongue out because they didn't tell them what they wanted to know, but they're evil.
I would like to see an Oathbreaker paladin that isn't based off being an anti-paladin.
What do you mean?
Right? So an anti-paladin is going to be very specific to D&D, and it's just the idea of like if the paladin is the stalwart champion of goodness and of the gods, right?
Oh, yeah.
The anti-paladin is the opposite. And the Oathbreaker is kind of thematically based off of that. But what if it was simply a paladin that's broken their oaths, right? So they're no longer that kind of paladin, like a fae or whatever, right? It doesn't necessarily mean they're all of a sudden evil and the worst person on the planet, or for whatever reason they broke it. So, like, I would like to see like a more interesting take on it.
They did have that, like in the earlier editions. That wasn't there, like.
Oh, you just got screwed. You became a fighter with like none of the abilities of the paladin or the fighter or something.
Well, that's I mean, to that point, it's like I still think paladin and pound for pound is probably the best class in 5e. It's like
a
heavily armored warrior who can also heal themselves and has huge saving throws. It's like, what more do you want? And like in earlier editions, that was balanced by like, they're really powerful. But if you screw up, you lose that power. So
you lose that power. You gotta give away all your
shit. Handle the power and whatever. You can just be an asshole.
You had to tithe 10%.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh wow. It's past 9 already, man. That went
it's that time, man. We're just talking.
Sure.
But as you mentioned, it is past 9:00. But we're gonna be back tomorrow, and Stephen Partridge will be running some 5e D&D for us. what he is a fabulous dungeon master. I think he's one of the best DMs that I've played with. So you should come check him out and the rest of us. And also, it's just a great group of people to game with. So we'll be back, and as always at noon. We're doing the live chats every day, but every day during the week, but Wednesday we take Wednesdays off to film some videos. Today's guest was Sly Fleur, so we have some cool people on. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy. And it was Mango.